Okay, let's just talk about the utility of cryptocurrencies. So Bitcoin is the grandfather. It was, it came out of a white paper that was written in 2008 or 2009, I can't quite remember, by Satoshi Nakamoto. It's a 9-page document, which is probably one of the most impressive documents I think I've read. I don't know if you've read it, but it really, it came on the heels of the financial crisis in 2008, where somebody put some thought into this. Everybody's thinking, how do we fix the financial system? What's wrong with the current financial system? Well, it's inflation. If you look at, for example, the Rand, before the Rand came into being in 1961, we had the pound. That's right, we used to have the pound. Since the Rand came into being in 1961, it's lost 99% of its value. Actually, Davi Ruth, the economist, pointed out to me, 99.8% of its value has been lost in that period of time. You are in this continual war against the erosion of your money. And you don't notice it because, so inflation is 3% at the moment, 3.5%. But it's being eaten up all the time. But when you just zoom out a little bit and you see that, well, how am I going to preserve my wealth? And so stablecoins have come up. These are the crypto version of the US dollar. And they now account for a huge part of your business and a huge part of the international crypto business. These are digital versions of the US dollar that are stored on the blockchain. Blockchain being basically a database that you cannot alter. It's immutable. It's a fantastic storage mechanism, actually. But if you look at the US dollar, you go back to 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve. Many people consider that, you know, the equivalent of a nuclear holocaust, what has happened to money since then. The US dollar has lost 98% of its value since 1913. We used to be on a gold standard, so you know your dollar and your rand was backed by gold, and that was demolished in 1971. Actually, before that, if you go back to Bretton Woods, which was the agreement that existed at the end of the Second World War, it was a new financial order for the world. You had the US dollar being backed at $35 an ounce to the US dollar. So the rest of the world was pegged to the US dollar. So the pound, which was in South Africa at the time, had an indirect peg to the US dollar. That was all demolished in 1971. And if you go back and look at the charts, 1971 is the date when everything just exploded and money started to lose value. So I want to hear from you, Carl, about the significance of Bitcoin and what came after it from your point of view, because you were one of the early guys on this.
Yeah, so I guess I've been thinking about something like Bitcoin for many years before the white paper, which was published in 2008, and then the first blocks got mined in 2009. And I always had this as a like a young student growing up on like majorly on the internet, this idea of what would the world look like where we had a global neutral form of money that's based on software code rather than something that's printed by decree or fiat. So it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time. One of my favorite authors was Neil Stephenson. He's a sci-fi author. He wrote about essentially something like Bitcoin. So when the white paper came out, and to your point, the white paper was a very special document. And by the way, the white paper, the Bitcoin white paper, doesn't mention the word crypto even once. So per the author's definition, Bitcoin is not even a cryptocurrency. He calls it a digital electronic form of person-to-person cash, electronic cash, essentially. And so that's where my fascination with this new technology first kicked in. Obviously, when I read it, I was like, this is impossible. This is sci-fi. This is something that can never be. Studying it, realizing that, you know, there's a true potential that this might actually have a big impact on the world. So that was my belief at the time. And then subsequently, tokens coming after that, I've always felt that the emphasis was less on it being money and more on it being something else. So for example, Ethereum being a smart contract platform. Great, that's fantastic. It serves that purpose, but the initial premise was different. And I don't think any of the tokens that subsequently came really sort of addresses this concept of an electronic form of cash. And so for me, Bitcoin is by far the most interesting token. And I'm not even going to call it a crypto token, but the most interesting blockchain-based digital token that's ever existed. Other people can speak about other tokens. I've had long debates with people about it. I'm just not as interested in those things, so I'm not going to talk much about it.
Right. So when we talk about Bitcoin is the grandfather, everything that came after that being Ethereum, Solana, BNB, XRP, these are all, and there are tens of thousands of
They have
them.
their uses.
Most of them are completely useless scams. And that
most cryptos are.
Most cryptos are. And that's, that is the truth of this, you know, and people think, I was talking to Sam beforehand. I went to a conference, a crypto conference in Dubai, and there was a journalist from Ghana came and he said, "But isn't Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme?" When I started writing MoneyWeb Crypto back in 2019, you know, the first articles were, it was, you know, this is what you can do with crypto. Here's this thing called Bitcoin, and the comments were very hostile, you know, accusing me of promoting a scam. Today, the stats are that more than 60% of MoneyWeb readers own crypto, which is, just looking at the show of hands here, is very similar to what I think I see here. So there's been an education step for all of us as we've gone along, but the truth is that most cryptos are a scam. And, you know, a lot of them struggle to get listed on an exchange. Now, Larry, you can maybe talk about that, is of these tens of thousands of cryptos that are looking for buyers, how many of these, what is the approval process that you have to go through to get onto the Binance platform?
No, that's a big question. But I think before you even get into that conversation of, you know, where you're asking for approval, I think there has to be something that's more substantial based on your token that you create. And to Carl's point is that blockchain and the community that was around it, right? They came and they believed in something, and that's how projects generally were generated, by community sentiment. So I think that's some of the fundamental ethos around the technology that's quite different, and sometimes we overlook because we're so busy, you know, looking at what's the next profit margin opportunity. I always like bringing that into the conversation and saying, you know, when you're talking tokens and projects and why most of them are shitty is because it's kind of moved away from the genesis of why they were created or where these things started coming from. So I understand where Carl gets his enthusiasm around Bitcoin from, especially because there's quite a few of them where projects actually matter. But regarding the listing process from Binance, that's something that at this point in time is extremely robust. I think we obviously set out the specific guidelines out on our website, but what you'll find is a similar standard to what it would require one to list on the normal exchange like a JSE, maybe not as robust in terms of the paperwork, but the questions and trying to identify the risk and understanding the tokenomics behind the token that they're trying to subscribe on our platform, that due diligence and that assessment is met with the same robustness that we would have experienced in that industry. The reason I say that is because Binance found itself in an interesting trajectory where it kind of revamped and the world was getting into grips in terms of compliance, right? And we had to crack down in terms of operational controls, etc. And with that experience or with that transition, Binance employed like over 700, 800 compliance officers. You find that a lot of the senior management employments were ex-regulators. Richard Teng, our CEO, came from the Singapore Regulatory Authority. I mean, I'm from the South African Reserve Bank. We come from reputable industries that understand these risk classifications and typologies and know how to identify, you know, what makes financially sound sense. And we apply that same type of robust measures when we're considering these opportunities or these tokens that's presented to us. I do think that when it comes to stablecoins, it puts it into a different dynamic because you kind of have more stakeholders that's interested in it, especially because of the sovereignty that's attached to that coin by virtue of it being a one-to-one representation of the actual currency. And you'll find that central bank conversations, especially when I go across Africa and have these conversations with them, they're worried about dollarization because it's already taken place in this fiat reality. And now we're in a digital economy. And what are the leading stablecoins? It's the dollar. So now the question is, how do they become relevant? Because their relevance will determine whether or not their currency depreciates or appreciates, right? and trying to find solutions around that makes them another stakeholder that we engage with to say, this is why or how you should be regulating stablecoin issuers. This is how liquidity actually works in this type of market, and them now getting up to speed and realizing that it's no longer an option of saying, should we regulate or not? It becomes a necessity for them to stay relevant as an economy in this global changing dynamic.
Yeah. If I can comment, another very important aspect when you're looking at things like coin listing is obviously the different jurisdictional requirements that you'll have. So for instance, in a South African context, you cannot enable trades between anonymous clients, for instance, and you do have coins which effectively are intended, they're referred to as privacy coins, that they're intended to effectively anonymize the parties on either side of the transactions. And they do so for various reasons. It's not necessarily always for nefarious reasons like, terrorist financing or fraud, money laundering. But I think that's often a very important consideration. I think Larry just touches on it. We've come from a past where probably 2016, 17, listing a token was relatively easy. You had to do no KYC, no KYB, and it was effectively a very, very free market. But the danger of it is obviously the consumer protection aspect, which has become a very important point, especially if we bring it closer to home, where we've seen regulations around KYC, KYB, the need to have a risk management and compliance program from a token perspective in South Africa, ensuring that your client, and effectively ensuring that you have the ability to follow the money, as people always say. And that's very important, and that's obviously one of the hallmarks of the blockchain technology. The transactions are immutable, and I always said, it's very difficult to follow cash because it changes hands. But blockchain technology has enabled us to ensure that we know exactly where transactions go, where movement is, and effectively building controls to ensure that it doesn't go to illicit territories, sanctioned regions, and as effectively stays within the safe ecosystem.